All right, so if you want to grab a paperback Bible that is under the chair in front of you or download the Bible app for free, we're going to be in Mark chapter 7. Table of contents will show you where to find Mark in the Bible, or you can Google Mark chapter 7 and maybe put NIV for New International Version next to it. So we're continuing through a series that we've been in on and off called The Real Jesus. And what we're doing is we're building a biography, if you will, of the real Jesus of Nazareth, not just one that, what we want Jesus to be. Hey, I'd sure like, because, this is stuff that I value. This is something that I think's true. But what did the real Jesus teach? What did he do? Who is he? And so the oldest existing eyewitness account is the Gospel of Mark. So we've been chunking through that on and off. So we're back in it. If you want to start from the beginning, maybe you've missed some, or you're like, hey, I'm new here, you can go to our YouTube playlist, and it's just called The Gospel of Mark, and you'll see in order. There are like fun videos that set a lot of the sermons up, but all the sermons through the Gospel of Mark, starting with Mark chapter 1, and now we're at Mark chapter 7, and we are at verse 24, and it says this. This is a pretty cool, fascinating story. Jesus left that place where the last stuff happened, and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. Okay, so pause there. Before we get into this, there's a scholar from the 1950s, a Scottish dude named William Barclay, and he wrote this: when this incident is seen against its backdrop, it becomes one of the most moving and extraordinary in the life of Jesus. So this is a very short story, but it is one of the most fascinating stories to me in the New Testament, especially like in the Gospels, the scenes of Jesus. And so this is what's happening. So Jesus has traveled from Galilee, a Jewish territory where 90% of his ministry happened that we know about. And so we got a map here. So he's traveled from Galilee, and what he did was he had been traveling. And so just picture like Galilee's right here, and there's the Sea of Galilee. And so he travels from the Sea of Galilee northwest right there to Tyre. Now, I know you can't see the words, but I just want to give you so here's Sea of Galilee, and then he goes northwest, so way out of Jewish territory. And most of the time, he was in Israel. He was in Jewish territory. There's only one time so far, I think, he crossed east of the Jordan River, went over to the Decapolis, which there are Jews and Gentiles there. So he travels up there. He's gone north, and Tyre was located in a country at that time called Phoenicia. And Tyre and this other city, Sidon, are often mentioned together in the scripture. They're kind of like twin cities, and so they're on the coast. So they've come all the way up here. This is modern-day Lebanon. What is then Phoenicia is modern-day Lebanon. And so he travels up into this Gentile, non-Jewish area, and it says in verse 31, at the end of the story, when Jesus left that country, he said, bye, Phoenicia. Little dad joke for Mother's Day, just trying to compete, you know what I'm saying? Okay, so Jesus, in his ministry, he focused almost exclusively on Israel. And so why did Jesus go here? Well, he wasn't there for public ministry, apparently. He wasn't going to do what he usually did, show up at a town, start teaching, healing people. I think he's there for respite. I think he's there for privacy and rest, a temporary escape from the public eye, maybe to take some time to teach the disciples, which he often would do. He'd, go out there, they'd do their stuff, they'd come back, and he'd privately teach them. Maybe it's to plan his future course of action. There were times where Jesus spent some time with his disciples or thinking about what he would do next. And so maybe to prepare himself spiritually for what he knew was coming. This whole gospel is an on-road to the cross, which is the ultimate mission of Jesus. And so in Israel, his own country, he was under attack from like every direction. And this could be the time to be like, okay, let's go get a break. I mean, we're being attacked by the religious leaders. We're being attacked from every direction. So as one author put it, the rejection of the Jews had become the opportunity of the Gentiles. So he goes into what we would call Lebanon for some respite. So the previous story covered last week by Paul Sheneman, who did an incredible job, showed that Jesus was just not buying what the religious people of his time were selling. And that was, hey, here's the scriptures, But let's add a whole bunch of man-made rules to those scriptures about what we think makes a person ceremonially clean or unclean. And they added all this stuff to say, okay, you are clean spiritually. Ooh, but you're unclean if you do this. But it was stuff that wasn't in the scriptures. They just added tons and tons of that. Jesus in the passage last week makes it clear, I'm not buying that. No, that you are putting tradition above God's scriptures. So could it be that this isn't a coincidence, that this story is right after that teaching? Could it be that Jesus went northwest into Gentile territory to help people understand that the Jewish concept of clean and unclean was also not applicable to there are clean and unclean people based on race? And so that there's no coincidence. Wait, your stuff, you think people are clean or unclean based on they're inherently Gentile, so they're unclean? Okay, I think we need to go spend some time around some Gentiles. And they go north. It's no coincidence, because even the stories after this are about him in Gentile territory. And so it's Jesus' way of saying Gentiles are not unclean. We're going to go spend some time resting with Gentiles all around us, and through faith, they can have a place in God's kingdom also. Amen. So, this episode fundamentally is about crossing boundaries, crossing borders. And in verse 7, it says, but he couldn't keep his presence a secret. He wanted privacy, but his fame keeps preceding him everywhere he goes. And there's at least one person in the city who is like, I know Jesus is here, and I got to find him. And so that's what happens. Verse 25, in fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman with a little daughter who was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. So, this woman's first move shouldn't be a surprise to us. She heard about Jesus, and she hunts him down. Whatever house he's staying in, she finds out he's there. She enters the house. She goes, why? Why would she do that? Why would she be so bold? Because she's a mom, okay? When your kid is about to fall off a cliff, you're like, oh, I'm not even going to think. Like, her child has an evil spirit, an unclean spirit, a demon. And so she's like, I will do whatever. And so she doesn't even hesitate. She doesn't think about it. She just asks. She is desperate. So in many ways, this is a mother who's been cornered. When you think about her story and put it all together, her race and her nationality are against her. She's a Gentile, and the guy she's seeking out is a Jew. And most Jews don't like Gentiles, and most Gentiles didn't like the Jews. There was this rivalry going on. And so her gender was against her. She was a woman in a society dominated by men. Satan was against her. One of his demons was in her kid, had taken over her kid's body, spirit, life. And in Matthew 15, which I'll refer to a few times, his version, another gospel writer, tells us some details that Mark doesn't tell us. And one of the things that he says is that the disciples were against her. They basically, when she comes in the house and is, calling for Jesus, they're like, send her away. Like, she's annoying. She just keeps calling out for you. And also, I'm sure, she's a Gentile and she's a woman. Send her away. And then for a minute in the story, it even looks like Jesus is against her. This mom is cornered. She's backed into a corner. So she hears Jesus come to her city. She hunts him down. And most Jewish holy men would never even have spoken to her. But here's the dialogue that takes place. So after she begs Jesus, cast the demon out of my daughter, this is what Jesus says. Verse 27, first, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Skirt! What? What did he just say? So did Jesus just call this woman and her tormented daughter dogs? Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Happy Mother's Day. It's just I still have not learned how to pick the appropriate passages for the days that I'm preaching them. No, this is really crazy. So this is why we are going through the Gospel of Mark, because we don't want to skip or miss stories like this. This is so powerful, what is in this story, and it is one of my favorite stories in the Gospels, but it is also one of the most scandalous stories about Jesus to dig into and be like, what is going on here? Okay? Now, you might be like, well, maybe there's some way it's positive, Dan. I don't know. Have you ever heard an athlete say, I got that dog in me, like the Syrophoenician woman in Mark 7? No, you never heard someone say that, okay? So no, what's going on? Well, we live in a society that loves dogs, right? I mean, canine friendly, we love dogs. I love dogs. The dog we have now, Sullivan, is the first dog I've ever had in my life, and I can't imagine life without a dog now. I'm like, how was I so stupid for so many years? Never had a dog, man. And so, but back then, they did not. It wasn't a super, hey, we love dogs kind of society in the first century. Dogs were not the well-loved guardians they are today. In fact, most dogs back then were wild scavengers that lived in the streets. They were dirty. They ate literally corpses if they found, they were gross, man. And so Jews often used the word dog as a derogatory term for a Gentile. You Gentile dogs, and you'll even see that in Scripture. And so here's the thing about Jesus. Like, fake Jesus of our own mental creation is never potentially scandalous. He's never potentially offensive. He's never like, ooh, that wasn't sterile. That wasn't like super clean. That wasn't something I'd find in a Christian bookstore. Jesus is like, he doesn't fit into that. And so the real Jesus sometimes deliberately is scandalous or even offensive. And he often would put stumbling blocks in people's way and be like, now, are you going to trip over me? Or are you going to engage with me and understand what I'm saying to you? And so Jesus called people things that they didn't want to be called at that time. I mean, the religious leaders, he called them hypocrites and brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs. You know, he told people in general, this is an evil generation. He called Herod, a political leader, a fox, which, by the way, I saw my first fox in the wild on Friday when I was mowing the lawn. Dude, it was dope. I was like, I want to see a fox. I've been saying that for like a year, and I saw one cross the street. Look at me. I was like, oh, I see you, Herod. I see you. But here, this mom and daughter, dogs, no one likes to be called names. So the real Jesus is sometimes deliberately offensive, but we have to overcome the offense of Jesus before we can open the door to Jesus and be like, okay, you're not exactly what I expected, but I'm listening. I'm listening. But here's the case here, all right? I'll start to soften it. Ready for the softening? You're like, this is, whoa, okay? Jesus called her a dog not to be offensive. It shouldn't be offensive to us. It should be puzzling. Why? Because this whole chapter is about him being pro-Gentile. This whole chapter is, the whole clean and unclean thing before this is all part of that and setting it up. And after this, during this and after it, there's more stories of him going to help Gentiles. So something's going on here. What is it? It shouldn't be offensive. It should be, what is that? It should be puzzling. Why? What is going on? And so, how do we explain this? Well, one is just to start with a term. If you unpack what happens here, the word dog, he doesn't use the typical word that people use for dog. So when a Gentile was in the presence of a Jew, and if they were having some kind of racial thing go down, and the Jewish person called them a dog, it isn't the word he's using here. He uses a totally different word, which totally should be like, okay, clue, something different's going on here. So the word that was used for the scavengers, that's not the word. He uses a diminutive term, which I have to admit, it's been a while since I've been in school. I was like, diminutive? What's that? I had to look it up. It's whenever you take the root of a word and you add an ending on it to make it a little version of that in a way that's very endearing or sweet. Like if you tell your kids, hey, we're going to put a quarter in this, and then after that we're going to feed, not the ducks, we're going to feed the duckies. Right? That's a diminutive form of duck. Oh yeah, hey, before you go to school, don't forget every morning you have to feed the fishies. It's this endearing thing that's like it's a little version of that. And so what would it be for dogs? The doggies, or the puppies. That's exactly what he says to her. He says, okay, well, we got to let the children eat first before the doggies that are there, okay? And so first he softens that word, like, okay, what's that all about? It's a characteristically affectionate term, and he takes the sting out of it. But no matter how you slice it, it's still, is this an insult? No, it's a parable. And so a parable is a metaphor or some kind of thing you have to unpack the meaning of. And so it's a parable. In fact, the man-made headings that go before each story, I think this one in the Bible probably says like the faith of a Syrophoenician woman. It could just as easily say in that man-made heading, the parable of the children and the puppies at the table. It could just as easily, because this is just a little parable that Jesus tells. So this is what he's saying. He's saying, I know how, you know how families eat. In that time, it's basically like the father would sit down and he'd have the meal, and he would basically distribute it to, the rest of the family. And so talking about, he says, first, the children eat what the father gives them. Then the puppies, their pets, eat the food from the table too. But there's an order. There's a progression to it. The puppies must not eat the food from the table before the children. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about there's a progression to this. What does that mean? Well, the other gospel writer who includes this, Matthew, he adds one little thing, which he often does, like there's more detail in his stories. They're longer. He's the Dan Smith of the gospel writers. A little more wordy, a little bit more verbose. And so he includes in verse 24, Jesus answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Okay, he spent most of his time with the Jews. He's saying, man, I came as a mission to Israel, to the Hebrew Jews, to show them that I'm the fulfillment of the Hebrew Old Testament scriptures. I'm the fulfillment of all the promises they received in those scriptures. I'm the fulfillment of the prophet, priests, and kings. I'm the fulfillment of the Jewish temple itself. I am the fulfillment of this. That is who I have come for. I've come for the lost sheep of Israel. But then when he dies and is resurrected, then immediately he tells his disciples, now go to all nations. So there's a progression, there's an order. He shows up, he focuses first on getting the message to the Jews, which also happens with the Apostle Paul later, who says, I go first to the Jews, then to the Gentiles. He'd enter a town, and he'd go first to the synagogues, preach. They'd kick him out, tell him he's a heretic, and then he preached to everybody. And so that was kind of how it went. And so now he says, there's an order to my mission. Here's my ministry plan. Israel first, Gentiles later. Okay, I'm not here for the Gentiles yet. So then, he also throws in a touch of hope. Just the word first. He says, first, let the children eat what they want. So then she grabs onto the hope of this first, let those children eat. And she, in a very witty way, knows and catches his meaning, and she responds immediately in verse 28. Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And so she's basically saying, okay, I get it. I am not supposed to be at the table yet. I am not from one of the 12 tribes of Israel. I have not read the Hebrew scriptures, the Bible up to that point. I do not worship the God of the Bible. I'm not worthy. I don't have a place at the table. I accept it. And so she isn't huffy. She isn't offended. She says, but you are generous. Your table is filled with bread. There's more than enough bread on that table for me and everyone in this entire world, and I just want some crumbs right now. That's essentially what's happening right here. Her response to that is, there's enough on that table for me right now. I know there's an order, but there's so much blessing that you have to give. So here's why I love working our way through the books of the Bible. It's for payoffs like this. Like you have to wrestle through these passages. There's a guy in his commentary on this passage, James Edwards, who writes this about this story. He said, this pagan woman understands Jesus' mission disclosed to her in this parable. What an irony this is. Jesus has been seeking desperately to teach his chosen Jewish male disciples that and yet that every time they have been dull and uncomprehending. The fact is, this pagan woman is the first person in the Gospel of Mark to hear and understand a parable of Jesus. No one has understood a parable of Jesus at this point. It is always about people to understand, and so he will explain it to them, or he'll let them struggle with it. Here, she immediately grabs onto the meaning of his riddle and has a response that's super witty in response to that. Two things about her response. One, so much humility, okay? She basically says, I understand for your order of things, Israel first, Gentiles later, I don't have a place at the table. I totally understand that. So first, when me and Shannon got married, Shannon was up here earlier, obviously, with me. She's the hot chick that you're like, how'd you get her? I know, okay, you know what I'm saying? I got it like that, man. I'm married up. Okay, so when we first got married, we had a few things in common, but I was this punk kid who was a new Christian, and she had grown up a preacher's kid, and she was from the country. I was more from the city, and we just all this stuff. But we were trying to find things we had in common. And so when we got married, we started trying each other's, interests. And so one of the things was like, man, I love NFL football. She was like, I love college basketball. And I was like, some things got to change around here, you know? And so I did start watching NFL with her, and I taught her the rules, and she became a huge NFL fan. And I watched college football with her, but she eventually more gravitated toward, I like football a lot. Then we started talking about movies, and I was like a creepy horror movie fan. And she was like, I don't know if I'm going to get behind that. And I was like, well, let's try this movie at the time that was new, Blair Witch Project. I don't think she made it a half hour, and she was like, I'm tapping out. And I was like, I totally get it. She liked musicals and like romance, old movies especially. She loved Audrey Hepburn and just old movies in general. We watched Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Meet Me at St. Louis. She had, just a barrage of them. And I watched a few of them where I was like, whew, okay. Yeah, some of these are all right. But I was like, okay, but I watched them, and I did make it through them. She didn't make it through Blair Witch, but I did make it through them. But one that we could agree on, eventually she was like, I love Sabrina. And Audrey Hepburn, Audrey Hepburn, was in the original, but I think we started with the remake, which was Harrison Ford, because I loved Harrison Ford. It's like, oh, we can meet in the middle. It's like that song, Breakfast at Tiffany's. That's the thing we have together. So, yeah, that was it. I was like, Harrison Ford, that's my dog. That's Han Solo. That's Indiana Jones. That's, it's Witness. That's, goes on and on. So we watched it together, and here's a scene from that movie that kind of applies here, is the whole thing is about Sabrina Fairchild, who's a servant girl, and she has this love affair with this rich tycoon. It's Mother's Day if I'm telling, like, chick flick, okay, if we're doing that right now. Okay, it's Mother's Day. I adapt to the people, you know what I'm saying? Okay, so she's a servant girl. She has this love affair with this rich tycoon, Harrison Ford, who's got that cool scar on his chin. And so at the end, Sabrina runs away to Paris, and this rich man goes to her father and says, where is she? He's trying to pursue her now. And the father says, you don't deserve her. And basically he's saying, you're a dog. You don't deserve her. Now, that has a whole other connotation for a guy. But he's like, you're a dog. You don't deserve her. And what does Harrison Ford say? He says, I know, but I need her. And so the father says, okay, here's where she's at, and he goes after her. Now, how would that have gone differently if the father said, you don't deserve her? And he's like, what? She's a servant girl. I'm rolling in it. She would be lucky to marry me of my pedigree and all that kind of stuff. What would the father do? Same thing you or I would do. Be like, well, have fun figuring out where the crap she is, you arrogant son of a... that'd be how it would go, okay? Like, there's no way. And so this is the point. It's like, for Harrison Ford, if he thinks he deserves her, he doesn't. If he doesn't think he deserves her, he does. And that is the gospel. The humility that this woman shows is, you don't owe me anything. I don't deserve a place at the table. I get that. But you have so much graciousness. There's so much bread on that table. I'm not worthy. Then you are. Another writer put this way, and I love this. One author says, if you say, I see, Jesus says, you're blind. If you say, I'm blind, he says, you see. Finally, you see. Another way to put it is, if you say, I'm all right, I'm good. I'm a great mom. I'm a great dad. I'm a good person. I work hard. I pay my kids' bills. I haven't done this, or this. These are the sins that I don't commit. I'm all right. Jesus says you're condemned. But if you say I'm condemned, he says you're all right because I took the condemnation for you. That's the gospel. There's this humility that begins all of it, and that is you have to say, I am not worthy of your blessings. I'm not worthy to sit at your table because of what I've done. In fact, Jesus said in Luke 14:11, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. That's the good news of the gospel. So she has this humility that is striking to Jesus. Then on the other side, she has this assertiveness, okay? She has this humble assertiveness, this bold faith. So this clever woman catches the meaning of the parable. She has this witty response, but she becomes the first person to engage Jesus in a constructive exchange about his mission. And she engages him in creative debate. She refuses to accept dismissal. She will not take no for an answer. She's saying, okay, the gospel is coming to the Gentiles later. Cool. Give me a little teaser trailer right now. There's plenty of bread on the table. Our time is later. I want a teaser trailer right now. She's wrestling with him. She's content in the most respectful way, but she's wrestling with him. In fact, it's cool to me that you might not think this is cool, but she's a Gentile, a non-Jew. It's cool to me how much she's like Abraham, the father of the Jews, way back in the Old Testament, who says to God in Genesis 18, I'm just dust. I'm just ashes, Lord. But then he starts praying for the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. He says, but would you spare these wicked cities if there are just 50 righteous people? I'd do it for 50. Yeah, I'm just dust. I'm just ashes. 45 people. He's haggling with God respectfully. Can I go 45? Can I get a 45 and a 45, 5, 5, and a 5, 5, 5? I'll do it for 45. And I'll get a 40 and a 40 and a 40. You know, it's like the righteous, if there's just 40, gets them down. He haggles them down to 10 righteous people. If there are 10 righteous people in the city, will you not destroy it? Sure. And it's also like Abraham's grandson Jacob, who was renamed Israel. That's where it comes from. Cool to contrast that with this Gentile woman. And so what happens with him is Jacob actually literally wrestles with God in Genesis 32, and Jacob holds on to God, and he says, I am not letting you go until you bless me. And that's what this is happening. She is a female Jacob. She's saying, I've got you. I'm not letting go until you bless me. There's plenty of bread on the table. Give me a teaser trailer right now. She won't say no for an answer, take no for an answer. Her response is witty. It's full of bold faith and assertiveness, but also humility. Not you owe me. More, I have no rights, but you have so much blessing. If I could reframe her response, it's this. Lord, I'm not saying to you, give me what I deserve based on my rights or my goodness. I'm saying, give me what I don't deserve based on your goodness. And I want it now. Please, I need it now. That's what she's saying. She's being assertive and so humble. And the bread from the Father's table, it's mercy, isn't it? There's so much mercy you have to give. Show me mercy right now. Give me a crumb of it right now before my time. And then in verse 29, Jesus told her, and this is the end of it, for such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her child lying in the bed, and the demon was gone. She responded to his parable so quickly, and Jesus loved it. Like her response, boom, here's an answer to your riddle that fits in me jumping into your riddle and still making my request. And in different translations, like ways that they properly communicate in English, what he's saying is such an answer, or wonderful answer, or incredible answer. In fact, the other version recorded in Matthew 15, then Jesus said to her, woman, you have great faith. Only 2 people Jesus ever told had great faith. Both were Gentiles, by the way. One was a centurion, Roman guy who worked in the small town of Capernaum, and this mom. Woman, you have great faith. And so he's only commended 2 people like that, and one of them is this person. Okay, let me bring it home with this. Years ago, I read an old book, 1964. Some of you are like, shut up, that's not old. It's kind of old. So 1964, this guy, his name is Elton Trueblood, which is the dopest name ever, okay? It's not Elton John, no, Elton, I don't know if that's a cool name, but when you put Trueblood with it, Elton Trueblood, oh dang, that impresses a Smith. When you got a name like that, Elton Trueblood, all right, dude, will you adopt me? So he wrote a book called The Humor of Christ, and the whole thing is a very scholarly book of him going through the Gospels, showing us where Jesus demonstrates humor. And he goes through and he shows, which some of it I knew, like exaggeration in that day was huge. So when Jesus said, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. They're like, what? Because they picture, just like, that's crazy, Jesus. You hear what we said about the camel? They would laugh at that because exaggeration was a huge form of humor. Sarcasm, Jesus used sarcasm. Maybe not as much as I do, but he uses sarcasm. And so then he gets to this story, Trueblood does. And he says this, is there a harder problem than this in the New Testament interpretation? If there is, we don't know what it is. Taken at its face value, Jesus' statement is rude and contemptuous. Above all, it's a complete variance from the general picture of Christ that we receive from the rest of this gospel, particularly in connection with the poor and needy. How can we square this with his acceptance of harlots and tax collectors and his faith in poor fishermen? Perhaps the completion of the dialogue can provide us with a clue. He says this, the woman's witty reply is that she may indeed be a doggy, but even dogs get something, and they don't really demand anything fancy. The clue to Christ's spirit in the entire encounter is his immediate affirmative and friendly response to the woman's wit. He accepted her appeal and healed her daughter. If Christ could respond so readily to the banter of another, there is reason to suppose that there was an element of banter in his own earlier and apparently insulting statements. He talks about how we must remember that words are made very different in connotation by tone of voice and by the look in the eye of the speaker. These are things which there are things that we can say with a smile, but which cannot be said without offense, with a straight face. And so he goes on to say, it's clear that Jesus liked the Gentile woman. I just want you to sit on that for a second. He liked her and responded favorably to her ability to appreciate his real meaning, which was so different from the literal significance of his actual spoken words. He must have laughed at the way she engaged in witty dialogue. Thus, one of the best evidences of Christ's wit is the way in which he responded to the wit of another. The story of the Syrophoenician woman indeed comes to be seen as one of the most charming bits of evidence for Christ's sense of humor. The wonderful thing is that both he and she understood and saw the essential inappropriateness of his maxim. If Christ's words in the dialogue represent a form of banter, which is consistent with deep compassion, they give us one of the most delightful pictures of our Lord which we possess. It sheds light on his character. You know, after reading True Blood, and there's more to it, I abbreviated it, which you're like, you did? I abbreviated it. This is now how I picture it. He has changed my mind, which is all, it's conjecture. It's, man, what were his tones? If there was ever a story that I wanted to hear Jesus' tone, this is the one. If I got one, this is the one. So she comes to Jesus with her request, and now what I picture is Jesus knowing the racism and sexism of his time, and that she's experienced that from other Jewish men or other Gentile men, but appreciating her boldness, he tests her, but he's also speaking in front of the disciples. They're trying to get rid of her. And so picture, this is all in the presence of his disciples who he's been trying to teach clean and unclean. People aren't inherently unclean because of their race. So largely for the sake of the disciples who might think she's a Gentile dog, with an ornery grin and an ironic tone, he says, first let the children eat. Here are the children. They're surrounding him. First let the children eat. It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to doggies. But he changes the offensive word. He doesn't say the dogs, the nasty things are outside, the doggies, an endearing term. So he goes on, and she raises her eyebrows and quickly responds, but Lord, even the doggies under the table get the kids' scraps. And I wonder if Jesus burst out into laughter, which makes her laugh also. And then he throws his hands up and says, woman, you have great faith. You go home and your daughter is healed. And now it's totally changed how I look at the tone and wonder what he showed on his face when he interacted with this woman. And in the margins of my book, back when I read this a few years ago, I wrote, Jesus probably brightened her day before he even performed the miracle. A woman in a difficult situation, a mom in a difficult situation, probably ended up smiling and laughing with Jesus, then shortly afterward praising God for her daughter's salvation. And I want to go back to one last thing. Going back to what True Blood said, it's clear that Jesus liked the Gentile woman. I love that he says that. You know, when I wrote that in my notes, I write in Google Docs, and it underlined it as a grammatical error. Jesus liked this woman. And it underlined liked. What do you think when I hovered over it said? When I hovered for the correction. Jesus liked this woman. I hovered, and it said, Jesus loved this woman. Yeah, he absolutely loved her, but isn't it weird to the ears and to the Google Docs that Jesus likes people? He liked this woman. Like, he loved her wit. He loved, her spunkiness and the way that she came boldly but humbly and just wanted this blessing. And I just want to say to you, Jesus likes you too. Jesus likes you. There are things that he loves about. Maybe it's your wit. Maybe it's your hard work ethic. Maybe it is the way you take care of your kids. You sacrifice for them before yourself. That doesn't mean that Jesus winks at our selfishness. It doesn't mean that he winks at our greed or our grudges or our fits of anger or our promiscuity or our drunkenness. It doesn't mean he winks at those things, but in spite of all that, even if you are headed straight toward your own destruction, he likes you. He's cheering for you. He knows your potential, and he would like to bless you if you would demonstrate faith. He wants you to be adopted by the Father at the table. He wants you to come into the family by faith. Let's pray.